Greetings, everyone. My name is Bridget Cabrera. I go by she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm the Executive Director of Methodist Federation for Social Action. MFSA has been around for over 100 years old, and we're a faith-based policy and organizing network. Our mission is to mobilize, lead, and sustain a justice-seeking United Methodist movement, engaging people to be agents of God's justice, peace, and reconciliation. We're so excited to be co-hosting this series of webinars with our partner, United Methodist for Kairos Response. And we acknowledge that this land and the many lands that we're all joining from, its history and all the being seen and unseen, known and unknown as we step into our work on this land, most of us as uninvited guests. And we offer this work in the spirit of reparation, devoting ourselves to justice as we strive to uplift the legacy of this place and all of these places that we are joining from. We invite you to acknowledge the indigenous land of where you're joining us from and type that in the chat. A few announcements concerning our call today. By participating in our webinars, we covenant together to co-create an equitable and brave space where we learn, engage, and grow in relationship together. We are recording this webinar, and that recording will be shared in the coming days. You'll be able to access that through both MFSA and UMKR. It'll be sent out in our newsletters. It'll be on our YouTube pages, probably shared out on social media. So there'll be multiple ways that you can find this recording. And we also encourage that you share it with others you think might be interested in learning more. If you have questions, we invite you to type them in the chat. You can type them at any time during the call. You don't have to wait till the Q&A section. As your questions arise, go ahead and type them in there. We'll be gathering them for our moderator for our Q&A section. We have closed captioning. It's automatically generated, so do expect some spelling and other area errors, but we have that available. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for our conversation today, Janet Lair-Lewis. Janet lived and served in Palestine and Israel from 1994 to 2014. From 2001 to 2018, she was a United Methodist missionary from the United Methodist Liaison in Palestine and Israel from 2006 to 2014. Among her responsibilities was to assist in planning itineraries for visiting Methodist groups from around the globe. And upon her return to the U.S. in 2014, she served as advocacy coordinator for the Middle East with the General Board of Church and Society in Washington, D.C., until her retirement in 2018. Janet continues to be involved in the work for justice for Palestinians. Thank you, Janet.
Thank you and welcome, everyone. It's good to have this big list of folks and introducing yourselves. I'm going to take a moment to introduce our first speaker. Our speakers will be given roughly 7 minutes to speak. And then, as Bridget mentioned, there'll be Q&A time at the end. But it's my privilege to welcome Omar Harami, a former colleague and workmate of mine, actually. He carries a combination of identities, Arab, Palestinian, Jerusalemite, Christian, and Greek Orthodox. Since 2017, Omar has served as the director of Sabeel Ecumenical Liberation Theology Center. Sabeel is a Palestinian ecumenical grassroots liberation theology movement that deepens the faith of Palestinian Christians, promotes unity among them, and guides them to engage in justice and peace. Omar has served on the Kairos Palestine Steering Committee as well. Omar, welcome.
It's a pleasure to be with you, and it's a pleasure to be introduced by Janet. When I started working at Sabeel, Janet was always around. She was the only staff person who never sat down. She was always walking and typing and writing and helping everyone. So thank you for helping me to begin this talk. Sabil is an organization that its main goal is to take care and to give support to Palestinian liberation theology. Palestinian liberation theology is a movement among Palestinian Christians that aspires to really strengthen and deepen the Christian presence and faithfulness to Jesus Christ in the land of our Holy One. We try to use religion and our faith as a way, as a tool to empower people to do the good work of God that would contribute to the kingdom of God. And we also try to help the church through theological work is to cleanse the Christian theology from any forms of bad theology that would justify genocide, violence, hatred, exclusivity. So Palestinian liberation theology has three important pillars. One pillar is inclusivity, is whether we like it or not, we are all God's children. God loves us all the same. So that is very bad news for me as a Greek Orthodox. I always felt that we were special, but it seems that this is in disagreement with the teachings of Jesus. So following Jesus means we need to follow Jesus, not our own understandings. The second part of it is that you cannot be, the second pillar, which is an important part of our theology, is justice. As Christians, we cannot believe that there's a way to be faithful to God if we're not a prophetic voice for justice and peace. Justice is an important component of our relationship with God. If we want to follow Jesus, then we need to follow in the footsteps of doing justice and peace and reconciliation. The third pillar is nonviolence. When there is so much evil, you need to fight evil. But if you fight evil with violence, which is evil, evil becomes stronger and more powerful. So nonviolence is the best method to preserve our humanity and the humanity of our oppressors. And the major component of nonviolence is international presence. Palestinians, Israelis, for one or a million reasons, we don't like each other. We're unable to like each other. We are afraid from each other. One group is oppressing the other group, but it depends on whom you're talking to. If I was an Israeli Zionist, I would say that the Palestinians are the ones who are, I would make the claim that the Palestinians are the problematic ones who are actually endangering Israel. And as a Palestinian, based also on international law, we believe that Israel and Zionism is the source of the dispossession of our people and the suffering of our people. So international presence, having a third party, is having a judge, a group of people who would come and observe, see for themselves what's taking on the ground. You don't have to rely on one person or another group to articulate an argument. You come and see by yourself. And by being present, by just observing of what is happening, you can also help find the solution. We believe the solution is international law, and international law is based on an international consensus of what does it mean to have rights, universal rights as human beings. So this is why when things became worse, and it's very dangerous for people to come to this land, and it's very dangerous for the people who are living in it, especially the underdogs, our Palestinian people, where almost 50,000 people have been killed since last October 7th. We're asking people, this is the time where we need peacemakers. We need the peacemakers when it is dangerous, when there is a war, when there is violence. This is when you are needed the most. And we have made a request, and we're thankfully that the church is filled with foolish people who are willing to take risks, who believe that the impossible is possible. And many of you have said yes, and many of you have come and continue to come. We already have a delegation now in Palestine Next week, on Sunday, we will have our solidarity pilgrimage with over 60 people coming from around the world. And I hope that this movement continues until no child is weeping, until no people have to bury their children, parents have not buried their children, and we become closer to the kingdom of God. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. As Omar said, one of the best ways to talk about the issue is to go and see for yourself, and it heightens your credibility after you do that. People can't take that away from you and say, no, you're lying, because you've seen it for yourself. Next, I'd like to introduce Carol Garwood. Carol Garwood, she is a retired insurance adjuster from Northeast Nebraska. She's co-chair of the steering committee for the United Methodist for Kairos response, UMKR, for the United Methodist Great Plains Conference Holy Land Task Force, and a member of the Nebraskans for Peace Palestinian Rights Task Force. Her first trip to Palestine, Israel, was in 2011, and she has traveled back and forth to the region 6 times since then. Twice in 2024. So she has very recent information as well. Carol?
Thank you, Janet. Welcome, everyone. And it's a pleasure to be here. And right now we're going to watch an approximately 9-minute video, or rather 2 short videos back to back. Both of these videos have been edited to shorten them. And together they give us a simple introduction to the recent history and current conditions in Palestine, Israel. And they'll provide some context for the solidarity trip that we're going to be telling you about. The first one is from Al Jazeera, and it was published in 2018. The second video is from Jewish Voice for Peace, and it was published in 2013. A lot has changed since then, of course. And now we're looking at much more terrible conditions in Palestine and more difficult political challenges at home. But the history and the essential issues of justice that these videos show us have not changed. Bridget, will you start the video, please?
"70 years have passed since the Nakba, the catastrophe in Arabic, took place in Palestine in 1948, in which more than 750,000 Palestinians were forcefully displaced from their homes and pushed into refugee camps in East Jerusalem, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and neighboring countries. But the Nakba didn't end in 1948. The catastrophe continues to affect more than 12 million Palestinians, who remain stateless today. Historical Palestine was mostly made up of Palestinian Muslims, Christians, and a small number of Jews, who generally lived together peacefully. The persecution of Jews across Europe led them to believe that they were not safe there, and Zionists saw Palestine as a prime location for a Jewish homeland.
And it was clear that there were Palestinians on the land. Zionist leaders and common people alike got used to the idea that the only way of making Palestine a Jewish state is by causing the Palestinians to leave.
The Jewish Zionist movement began organizing immigration and buying land in Palestine. This was the first step in turning Palestine into a Jewish homeland. Then World War I began. Britain promised Zionist support for a Jewish national home in Palestine. This came as a formal political letter, known today as the Balfour Declaration. It also included that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. When World War I ended and the Ottoman Empire was defeated, Britain occupied Palestine. Jewish migration into Palestine continued for decades, and the Palestinian people organized large demonstrations against this influx. Palestinians saw British support of Zionism as biased and unfair. So the people of Palestine revolted in 1936 to fight against British and Zionist occupation. Zionist militias carried out bombing attacks against both the British and the Palestinians. As things got out of hand, the British announced in 1947 that they'd be ending their mandate on Palestine. The file on Palestine was then transferred to the UN, which suggested dividing Palestine into an Arab and Jewish state. As the British were preparing to leave, the new Jewish population began taking over, and it helped that they were heavily armed. The ethnic cleansing of Palestinians began months before the British officially left Palestine. Zionists were taking over major cities and hundreds of villages, forcing thousands of Palestinians into neighboring countries. As Zionist Jews declared the State of Israel on May 14, 1948, the surrounding Arab nations declared war, with the objective of liberating Palestine. Although Palestine had the support of other Arab nations and they outnumbered the Jewish population, the Israelis also had foreign military, political, and financial support. Israel grew beyond the UN partition lines during the Arab-Israeli War by destroying Arab villages and further reducing the Palestinian population. By April 1949, more than 500 villages and 10 cities were captured by the Israelis. Over 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homes, and over 13,000 Palestinians had been killed. Even then, the Nakba did not end. Today, Israel occupies the whole of historical Palestine. Israelis continue to build illegal settlements on occupied Palestinian territories. Palestinians in the West Bank live under military law, which subjects them to checkpoints, curfews, and arbitrary arrests. Palestinians in Gaza live under a blockade imposed by Israel. Gaza is set to become unlivable by 2020. Palestinians today continue to demand their right to return to their homes. For them, the Nakba will not end until this right is granted.
What would happen if you built a refuge for a persecuted people in a place where another people already lived? First, there are a couple of things it's helpful to understand. One, many Jews fled harsh persecution in anti-Semitic Europe, especially the Nazi Holocaust. Zionists encouraged massive immigration to historic Palestine, at that time a British colony, where Jews had an age-old connection and where small Jewish communities had long existed among larger groups of indigenous peoples. But when the UN offered the Jewish immigrants the majority of the land for a new state called Israel, for the indigenous Palestinians who lived there, it was a massive destruction of life. They rejected the UN's partition plan, and several Arab states invaded the new state of Israel. Israeli forces essentially erased over 400 Palestinian villages and towns. By the end of the fighting, Israel controlled 78% of historic Palestine. And when 750,000 Palestinians who fled or were expelled during fighting tried to return to their homes where the new state now stood, they were permanently barred by the Israeli government. While over 100,000 of their relatives and neighbors who hadn't left became second-class citizens of the new state, along with the new Jewish majority. Today, Palestinian refugees and their descendants number in the millions. Most are in the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and Jordan. Many are spread throughout the world, with millions still living in refugee camps, seeking to return to their homeland. Here's the second thing to understand. Israel was founded as a Jewish state. But now ask yourself, what exactly does that mean? People had lots of ideas about what a Jewish state should look like. Some called for equality for all citizens. But what was created, in practice, was institutional discrimination against non-Jews. In other words, Israel ended up being built on a blueprint of exclusion. The Israeli government wants maximum land and resources for Jews, but not the Palestinians living there. That's also part of why Israel has never defined its borders. In fact, they still hold on to land, the West Bank and Gaza, that they conquered in the war in 1967. Since then, Israel has built Jewish settlements throughout the occupied West Bank, building Jewish-only cities and supplying them with infrastructure like roads and army camps, schools, and even a college. Military occupations are meant to be temporary, but after 40-plus years, this one looks permanent and entirely unjust. In the West Bank, Israeli Jewish settlers and Palestinians live on the same land, but must live under two completely separate and unequal systems of Israeli law. The Jewish settlers dominate the natural resources, including water and agricultural land, and they're backed by the Israeli army. To maintain the occupation, Israel has demolished thousands of Palestinian homes and orchards, confiscated Palestinian land, bombed a captive civilian population in Gaza, and punished resistance with raids, arrests, and assassinations, all to gain maximum land, while making life so difficult for Palestinians that they will either leave or be too afraid to resist. Now that you understand the problem, what about the solution? What about peace talks? So far, over 2 decades of U.S.-backed peace talks have actually made things worse by helping Israel continue the occupation. It's been years of talking while Israel massively expanded the Jewish settlements and literally redrew the map. Peace talks are good if they're real, but not when they're theater to cover a land grab. So now what? The current world superpower, the United States, has been a terrible friend, enabling Israel's destructive and self-destructive expansion onto Palestinian land by funding the Israeli military, the biggest recipient of U.S. foreign aid in the world. But there's another superpower that can make the difference: you. There's a movement with hundreds of thousands of people just like you across the world, including Palestinians and Israelis, protesting, educating, divesting, and boycotting, all to bring nonviolent international pressure on Israel to stop violating human rights of Palestinians.
Thank you, Carol. We'll try to post a link to where they can get copies of those videos later on. We'll hear again from Carol in a moment, a little bit later. I'd like to now introduce the Reverend Daryl Hamilton, who'll be our next speaker. He's an ordained Baptist minister. In 2017, he earned his Master's of Divinity from Wake Forest School of Divinity, and in 2012, he earned his degree in political science from the University of Central Oklahoma. His ministry and leadership is centered on advancing diversity, inclusion, and advocacy for the vulnerable and marginalized to inspire our world toward greater justice and the love for all people. Welcome, Reverend Daryl.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be able to be here with you all. Just quickly, want to give gratitude to the MFSA, the Methodist Federation for Social Action, for hosting this space and allowing me to be here. Also, just gratitude to my colleagues who we sojourned together to the Holy Land at the end of the summer, early part of September. Omar Harami, who was our guide and our sage during that trip. Definitely a sage to me. Just want to give gratitude. And then just a real quick shout out if I can. I see I got one of my seminary colleagues on here, Amy Brown. We went to school together at Wake Forest. And so it was good to see your face and good to see your name. I want to quickly sort of talk about some of the things that I witnessed while we were there, with a key sort of emphasis on just the Palestinian Christian populations that we met. I wanted to key in there for 2 reasons. One, as we sort of heard during the video presentation that we saw, Christian Zionism very much is a tremendous part of the atrocities and the human rights violations that we're seeing in the Holy Land. Christian Zionism is, in my estimation, and maybe in many of your estimations as well, the key or the linchpin factor in the United States involvement and complicity in genocide in the Holy Land as we speak. And then I also want to speak to this because, there are lots of Palestinian Christians. We got a chance to hear from Omar, who's, Greek Orthodox, but many Palestinian Christians go unnamed and untalked about in spaces like these. And we have the conversation in one that continues to reinforce a false binary between, Jews and Muslims, when in reality that's not the case. But to begin, I would like to, if you will, just sort of center us reading a quick passage of scripture coming from the Gospel of Luke. It's a passage that many of you, I'm assuming, will recognize. Uh, it was a passage when Jesus first had come near and saw Jerusalem. The scripture says he wept for it. He wept over it, saying, quote, "If you, even you, had only recognized on this day the things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. Indeed, the days will come upon you when your enemies shall set up ramparts around you and surround you and hem you in on every side. They will crush you on the ground. They will crush you to the ground, you and your children within you, and they will not leave within you one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of your visitation from God." I like that passage of scripture because on the very first night of our delegation, those words were really ringing loud in my spirit. The very first night of our delegation, we actually were, on the Mount of Olives, and we were looking out to the old city. And I could not stop thinking about this passage of scripture, and where Jesus says Jesus wept. We say Jesus wept over over the news of Lazarus' death, but Jesus wept twice in scripture. When Lazarus died, and then also whenever he looked over the city of Jerusalem, he wept over it. And I felt myself weeping as well. That was my second trip to the Holy Land, and this second trip resonated a lot more strongly than the first. And I really did feel myself weeping. And a lot of what we saw and experienced over the course of our trip left me weeping as well. I want to share a couple of quick stories. One of those being with one of the families that we met in the Al-Makor region near Bethlehem. And forgive me if I mispronounce these names. I know Omar is going to harass me real bad after this is over if I'm butchering these names too badly. But I wanted to talk about the Kasia family. They are another group of people that we met. They are a group of Palestinian Christians who have been resisting the seizure of their land, the seizure of their home. I want to say for a decade now. That they first, I think it was like in 2013, is whenever Israeli occupying forces began trying to take their family land from them. It began by trying to take, or rather by, I think, burning down their family business, their family restaurant. And then after that, it went to, taking over their home. And then now that what they have done is they have rendered the space around their home a military zone. And that this is actually a consistent, military practice by the occupation forces, saying that this area is now being deemed for military purposes. And because it's being deemed for military purposes, you're not allowed to access it. Those military purposes could be, whatever they decide them to be, but anything that they could say to, whether it's, drills or training, or the area is now, unsafe. But for whatever reason, they're going to utilize that to keep them off their land. But this family has not stopped their resistance going back to get their land. That Alice Casilla, we met her, and we met her sister-in-law, and we met their mother. That they've been doing a lot of work to amplify their presence, and really trying to call on people to help save Al-Makor. That's the movement, save Al-Makor. And so while we were there, we not only got a chance to sit with them, but our group had went and participated in an action where they nonviolently, as Omar talked about earlier, marched up to the military gate, blocking the family's access to their land. They sat down, did a peaceful protest and demonstration. And this is something that Alice and her family has consistently done over the course of these 10 years. They have been successful in getting more and more people to know about them, but they need more, they need the story to continue to be told. And so that's why I wanted to make sure that I took time to tell their story. And again, these are a group of Palestinian Christians. They are Palestinian Christians who also share citizenship in the United States, and how they are, and Israeli citizenship, and how they are protected by neither the Israeli government nor the government of the United States. They are not protected or they're not supported by the Christian church. They have even built on their land at one time. Recently, they built a church for all nations on their property, down where it is that they've been living. They've been living in tents, and the occupation forces have since removed that church. Because that church is where they've been living, and they've been inviting people to come, and so there's consistent pressure and resistance from the occupation forces, again, not allowing them to have access to their home. And for the Christians that support the occupation, or for the Christians that support Zionism, it should make us beg the question, what is really at the root of our support? Especially if we're going to, say that our Christians around the world are, brothers and sisters in Christ. What does it say that we are passive and that we are just watching as our brothers and sisters in Christ are themselves being dispossessed, are themselves being beaten, are themselves being detained illegally? Is making me want to talk about the other family we met, which was the Nasser family, and how 24-year-old Leanne Nasser has been detained. At that time, she had been detained during our delegation. She had first got detained in April of this year. The family was expecting her to be returned home by the time we had arrived, which usually military occupation allows them to detain somebody for up to 4 months. But days before she was expected to be released, they decided they were going to detain her for another 4 months. All of this without her being charged a single crime. That she got on the radar of the occupation forces because of some work that she was doing. She's a college student, trying to, like raise, school supplies for students. Having been someone who has expressed, her displeasure with the occupation and then in support of her people, got on the radar of the occupation forces and has since been detained in a military jail. That Leanne is just one of tens of thousands of Palestinians detained regularly, Palestinians who are held hostage in the middle of this genocide. And so that hostage taking is not something that is going just, one way. It wasn't just hostages that were taken on October 7th. There have been hostages that have been taken ever since 1947. And so Leanne is one of those as we speak. Again, 24-year-old college student who has committed no crime, who has been charged with no crime, but is simply being held because the military chooses to hold her. And then it also makes me want to talk about Daoud Nasser as well, of the 10 of Nations, up in Bethlehem also, or near Bethlehem as well, and how for 30 years they have been fighting to keep their land, to keep their home from the occupation forces' attempt to seize their land. That for over 30 years they have been in an embattled court case that continues to get pushed off and pushed off and pushed off and pushed off because the occupation forces really have no case, really have no claim to the land, but are forcing Daoud and his family to prove over and over and over and over and over again that they actually have right to that they've been on the land as long as they've claimed to have been on the land, that the land is in fact being used and hasn't been abandoned. But in the midst of these 30 years, they have had to endure countless numbers of attacks, harassment by settlers, attacks by the military, and then also just attacks by the military court system. Again, continuing to force them to return to court, not hearing their case, but simply delaying and delaying and delaying. All of these, again, are Palestinian Christians in the Holy Land who their Christian identity does not protect them from the effects of this occupation. Why? Because the occupation isn't about anything other than Zionism. It isn't about anything other than racism. It isn't about anything other than ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. And so, as we said, you'll hear more stories from many of my colleagues during our trip there. Lots of reasons to weep. Lots of reasons to weep. And then you can also experience and know that the undercurrents of racism is also very, very much alive in a lot of what it is that is happening there. And so I'll tell a quick story that during my first trip.
Hey, Daryl.
Oh, yes. Am I on time?
Can you try to make it really quick?
Oh, okay. I thought I had more time.
We're running
Okay,
short of
I'll
time.
make it really quick.
Okay.
And so during my first trip there, early part of this year, I went with another delegation. I was the only African American on that trip. Again, during this delegation, it was myself, one other African American man in this trip, and during both trips, where we stopped at military checkpoints, and at these checkpoints, at both times was I the only one, and then on the second trip was the other colleague, both African American, who were asked to show our identification at this checkpoint. That I'm the only one that's being forced to pull out my passport. That I'm looked at with a degree of ire and suspicion. But yet, when they see the United States of America on my passport, the interactions change, which makes me always sort of question, what if that passport didn't say United States of America on it? What if myself, I was not Christian, but was any other religious affiliation? And so racism is very much a huge part of the experience that you will feel, that is felt in the occupied territories. But I'll end with this, with 30 seconds left, that although there are lots of reasons to weep, the thing that Jesus says when looking over the city of Jerusalem, that he wept over it because they missed not only their visitation from God, but they missed the things that make for peace. And so the last thing that I wanted to name is something that Omar gave to me, which was really transformative for my trip there during the time and since, where he talked about how that the things that make for peace, that the Palestinian people, nonetheless, despite all the things arrayed against them, all the forces of death arrayed against them, they are still living. That for every person killed during occupation, they are still burying their dead. For every home that is demolished, a home is still being rebuilt. For every bomb and bullet sent over by U.S. taxpayers, they are still marrying and being given in marriage. And so that there are still things being done in that land that are being done to make for peace. And so our call is to not miss the things that make for peace, and so that we can also join our hands in being peacemakers in that land.
Thank you. That's an excellent place to stop. The word for that is samud, steadfastness, and that's something that the Palestinians are expert at. I'm going to introduce our next speaker. This is the Reverend Sarah Webb Phillips. She's a pastor, retired pastor, after 42 years of the United Methodist ministry, over 7 conferences, 14 churches, and 3 campus ministries. Sarah grew up Methodist, found her life partner through her campus Wesley Foundation. She graduated from Candler School of Theology and served in United Methodist settings, except for one stint at the University of Notre Dame, but only God is perfect. So we'd like to welcome Sarah.
Thank you to all who are joining us today, and it's good to see friends old and new. I was so honored and privileged to be a part of this delegation that went. It certainly embraced my whole work of social justice throughout my ministry. Omar and the group, Sabeel, planning this trip, knew how to immerse us immediately on our first full day after visiting the Shafant refugee camp right outside, walled in from Jerusalem. We went to Silwan. Silwan has existed since the 10th century, and it includes the pool of Siloam, which we know from the New Testament. Siloam is a Greek word that means, what would you think? Silwan. It is a suburb of Jerusalem of over 60,000, mostly Palestinians who were there. All of the homes have been designated for demolition, 100%. So the houses have received a letter saying that we can't let you know, we won't know when your house is scheduled for demolition, but you will get a warning, and typically that warning is 15 minutes before the bulldozers pull up and for people to evacuate their home. And the real crowning blow of it is that the Palestinians whose homes are demolished are expected to pay for the demolition. When Jordan occupied the area, many records were lost, so people had to re-permit their deeds. But now Jerusalem, Israeli records do not acknowledge those Jordan deeds. So even though there have been families who have lived in homes more than a couple of centuries, this area is up for new Jewish settlement once it is destroyed. Our next slide shows that just to inform or to remind you, Palestinian areas have utilities of water, electricity, and sanitation at the whim of the Israeli government. Driving throughout the West Bank, you can easily distinguish the Palestinian villages and towns from Jewish settlements by the water storage on the roofs of Palestinian homes, so that there can be water during these times of blackout. And here is an image from atop a Silwan home. Our next slide shows we were hosted in the home of Fakhri Abu Diab, a prominent businessman born in the home his grandfather had owned. When Jordan occupied the area, they too had no legal document once the Israelis took over, so that, again, their home was one slated for demolition. In this next slide, Fakhri had lived there for an additional 35 years with his spouse and married children. Jimmy Carter, during his time as president, had dinner with the family. And in February of 24, Matthew Miller, with Anthony Blinken's ambassadorial visit this year, had a meal there as well, where he gave assurances to the family that their house would not be demolished, that they would do their best for that. This is part of the courtyard where you can imagine the former beauty, but next slide. In April of this year, their house was destroyed beyond repair, but enough was left to tell that it was a lovely home. However, the family and neighbors built a large one room amid the rubble where Fakhri and his wife still live, though it was built without, or they were living there when we came, it was built without a permit. When we asked him what would he do if the authorities found out that they had built another home and they came to tear it down, he said, we'll simply rebuild it again. Our next slide shows that one room that they built, and they were gracious hosts, and his wife had prepared a wonderful meal for our delegation, which we shared in that now rubble of their courtyard. Our next slide shows him amidst all the destruction of his home. He apologized for wearing black, but he said that since that day, he has been so sad and can't wear colors. This next slide shows us 2 weeks ago on a meeting with Omar, we heard that they had come back. They had left part of the house standing, and they had destroyed that and the one-room home that they had rebuilt. This lets us know of the kind of destructive hearts of a government that would have this kind of devastation for people who have lived on the land, who are productive citizens. Obviously, Fakhri is a well-established businessman, but their hearts reach out to us to say, see what they are doing. And I will encourage any of you to take an opportunity to go and see for yourself so you can come home and tell what is happening.
Thank you, Sarah. We already have some questions in the chat about how to do that. But we'll go ahead and go on to John. The Reverend John Wagner is a founding member of UMKR, United Methodist for Kairos Response, and served as its first convener. He later served as steering committee co-chair. He first visited Israel-Palestine in 2008 and was able to see the Israeli occupation up close. He was especially moved by the Palestinian Christians he met, but also the Palestinian Muslims and Israeli Jews he heard who were speaking out for a just peace. John attended Earlham College and got his MDiv at Yale Divinity School. He served churches in Indiana and Ohio for the last 42 years. He and his wife, Joanne, have 3 daughters and 2 grandchildren. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Janet. Hello, everyone. I'm going to be pretty quick here. I'd like to first show a few pictures, and I think we can get them up on the screen. This is a little boy that we met in one of the camps in the Jordan Valley. He wasn't able to participate with the other children when we were playing soccer. He had some emotional problems, I think epilepsy perhaps. He had a seizure while we were there. The next screen. Next picture of me. And I was able to play a little game with him and just be able to interact with him. And he responded. And we can look at the next picture. This would show Omar and myself just talking to him. And Omar, who I've come to respect greatly, said, "You've done a good thing. You've made able to, provide him with a little bit of normalcy for just a little while and show some caring." So my point here is that going over and providing even this kind of minimal solidarity is very important, and it means a lot to folks. And I didn't expect that, but I'm hoping this will be something you'll consider doing yourself. Next slide, please. And this is a fellow by the name of Sami Abu Shihada. He is an Israeli, Palestinian-Israeli politician. I just think it's important that you know that he encouraged us to support BDS, boycott, divestments, and sanctions. And I would like to encourage that as well, to urge some of you who are United Methodists to urge your annual conference to divest of Israel bonds. That was encouraged by our last general conference, and also to the rest of you communities can do more to divest, and hopefully we can urge the federal government to do some sanctions, although that seems unlikely at this point. Final thing is just a photo shot of a headline that was in the paper, and I was able to write an article that's just an example of the increased attention that comes to you once you come back. You have higher credibility. What Janet said is true. I've been able to do speaking engagements, have interviews, and so forth. And I would just encourage you to consider doing that and coming back. I'd also encourage you to ask some of the higher ups in these denominations that are represented here today, district superintendents, bishops, and whatnot. Please ask them if they'll participate. And that's all I have right for now.
Thank you, Dan. That was brief and to the point. Thank you. We're going to go back to Carol, who's going to answer the "what do we do next" question. Carol?
Right, thank you. So right now I'm going to go through some information for you that will suggest different things that you can do in your own communities and your own congregations. And Bridget is going to share this PowerPoint presentation for me. So there we go. Okay, so avenues and opportunities for solidarity. Many of us will not be able to go to Palestine on solidarity trips, but there are so many other ways that we can stand together with our sisters and brothers in Palestine. The presentation, this part of the presentation is focused on solidarity opportunities for United Methodists, but a great deal of what is here can apply to all like-minded, justice-seeking friends. So UMKR has a growing collection of prayers, sermons, songs, devotions, and study materials related to Palestine and Israel that you can bring to your church during the season of Advent and Christmas. When Christians are celebrating the Advent and Christmas season and thinking of events long ago in the little town of Bethlehem, there couldn't be a more appropriate time to invite our congregations to reflect on Bethlehem today and the current realities of life for Christ's disciples in the Holy Land. Ask your pastor and or lay leaders of the church to include Palestine and Israel in a service or other church event during the Advent and Christmas season. It could be a simple prayer or a responsive litany, a song, or one portion of a sermon. You might also be able to keep Gaza on your church's prayer list, in the bulletin or newsletter, on a website, or during worship. As we all know, humanitarian aid is urgently needed in Gaza and now in Lebanon as well. UNRWA needs our support. This is the UN agency that helps millions of Palestinians throughout the region. Their service and services are irreplaceable, and Israel wants to expel them from the region. We can help them bring food, medicine, and other essentials to the people of Gaza and Palestinians in the West Bank and Lebanon also. On our website, you can find links for UNRWA and other humanitarian organizations that have a significant presence and decades of experience in the Holy Land. Everything described here and in the chat will also be included with the resources for this webinar when it's posted on UMKR and MFSA's websites. One of the most important things we can do to transform our own society and our government policies is to learn more about Palestine, Israel as individuals and bring people together to share that in that learning. We don't have to be experts. We should be seeking to learn and share the essential justice issues at stake from a Christian and United Methodist perspective. Your pastor or other church leader may be able to help you get a group started, or you could ask the Missions or Social Justice Committee to spend time on Palestine, Israel. The Kairos Palestine document, which UMKR is named for, is Palestinian Christians' statement of faith and call to the global church and the world. It can be a good place to start. The Kairos Palestine movement has grown to have a global reach and has produced other good resources. In the last few years, many of the world's leading human rights organizations have produced excellent reports on Israeli apartheid with videos and other learning materials. We have collected them on our website. UMKR also has lists of recommended books and films. We can suggest other curricula for church groups to fit your needs, so get in touch with us. Instead of a small study group, you could plan a one-time event that everyone at church is invited to attend for a Palestine-Israel presentation and discussion. Whatever amount of time you will have, we can help you with a presentation and materials that will fit. People usually like coming to see a movie, and you can follow that with a structured discussion. You might even include a meal before the movie. See recommended films on our website, including several that have discussion guides. Feel free to contact us for help in planning this or any sort of event related to Palestine, Israel at your church. Christmas and Easter are excellent times to have a Palestine market at your church, and you're helping the Palestine people economically if the products originally came from Palestine. Palestinian olive oil is delicious, and olive wood items are very popular. You can also offer beautifully embroidered products, hand-painted ceramics, and other handicrafts made in Palestine. See some suggested sources on our website on the homepage for actions and campaigns. Mainstream media will tell you very little of what's happening on the ground in Palestine, Israel, or bring you analysis of events from a justice-based perspective. These are three much appreciated news outlets for that kind of coverage. You can subscribe to their weekly or daily digests. You can read as little or as much as you'd like, but even seeing the headlines and descriptions will raise your awareness. Here are some other sources that we have found provide good reporting and analysis. Of course, in recommending news outlets, we can't be certain that all they publish will reflect our positions and values. To build a strong United Methodist movement for justice in the Holy Land, consider sharing UMKR's webinars and websites and e-blasts at your church, in your networks, and throughout your conference. We have a variety of learning resources on our website, and new materials for congregations from our education committee will be published before the year is out. Palestinian Christians have appealed to fellow Christians for so many years to come and to see their land and their lives. Go beyond visiting ancient biblical sites and get to know the indigenous people of Palestine. When you come home, you can speak with authority about what you've seen. At our website, under tourism, you can find the United Methodist Conference resolution, Holy Land Tours, to learn our church's guidelines for United Methodists visiting the Holy Land. You can also find some upcoming tours that we would recommend. If you hear of an upcoming trip to Palestine, Israel that United Methodists are planning, get in touch with the tour leaders. Make sure they know about the United Methodist resolution on Holy Land tours and put them in touch with UMKR and with the Methodist Liaison Office in Jerusalem for suggestions in how to meet those guidelines. This is how we bring what we have learned and shared in our faith communities to the world and join in expanding the public's understanding, shaping institutional positions, and influencing government policies. For a broader perspective on what will make for peace and justice in the Holy Land, these are groups we would recommend getting to know and subscribing to their email list. We have their websites in the chat, and all the information shared there will be posted with the webinar on UMKR and MFSA's websites. A simple way for your congregation to make a statement of solidarity is with a display. Perhaps a UMKR poster about Palestinian human rights and a Palestinian flag. There are other posters under resources on our website. If you have some particular in mind, get in touch with us. The Church in the Rubble, Christ in the Rubble display of the Nativity at the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Bethlehem in December of 2023 was reported around the world. You could recreate it at your church and invite local press to see it and do an interview with you. The pastor or another church leader could also do the interview, someone who knows its significance. Set up a visual display on church property or somewhere in your community where you have permission. Some current displays are depicting the deaths in Gaza, particularly the children who have been killed list. We have numerous articles and videos describing such memorials at our website. See our homepage for actions and campaigns. Your church can take the apartheid-free pledge and become an apartheid-free congregation. Learn more about this initiative and get help in bringing this to your church by contacting UMKR. The next slide shows the apartheid-free promise wording. I believe, yeah, the pledge. That's the word I'm looking for. So take a look at that and contact us to see if this is something that would be a good idea in your church, in your conference, and what you need to do to see it through to adoption. This is such a crucial action area for Palestinian rights movements. If your conference would be supportive, get one of UMKR's annual conference resolutions submitted to your conference. Contact UMKR for help in figuring out if this would be a good idea in your conference, how to submit it, and what you'll need to see it through. This is such a crucial action area for Palestinian rights, political advocacy. Changing the policies of world powers is vital if we're going to see real changes on the ground in Palestine and Israel. Despite current realities in domestic politics in the US and other countries, we must keep using our voice and leveraging our collective power. UMKR action alerts will give you opportunities to do that. If you contact us, we can also help you connect with groups that have broad political action networks. The United Methodist Church made history at this church's General Conference this year, becoming the first Christian denomination to vote for divesting from Israeli bonds. UMKR is working to see this policy fulfilled at all levels of the church. Contact us to see what divestment steps might be possible at your church or in your conference. Boycotting is one of the most effective and time-honored tools for social and political change. There are several boycotts you can support, including the Chevron boycott that UMKR is involved in. See our website about that. Keep alert to other boycotts that we are mobilizing and learn more at the website of the BDS movement. Walking in prayerful solidarity with people of Gaza, usually some distance that corresponds to the length of Gaza. There have been hundreds of these pilgrimages over the last year on a small property or across a long distance, small and large groups on every continent. Besides offering a witness of solidarity, many pilgrimages raise funds for aid in Gaza. Join local public actions like demonstrations. We have links for websites that are listing them throughout the year. When you go, bring a poster that tells the world United Methodists are showing up. See our website for the signs. There may be other ways you can reach out to the local Palestinian community in your area. Start with a Google search and searching on Facebook or other social media. Join their mailing list, promote their activities, and show support. There are more ways that we can possibly cover here for you to step into learning about Palestine and Israel and advocating for justice and peace in the Holy Land. We hope you will keep exploring online and in your communities. Feel free to contact us when you're looking for assistance or inspiration. And thank you very much for attending this webinar today.
Thank you, Carol. Just a quick question. We want to have some time for question and answers. How much time do we have, or should we just go until people drop off? Okay, we will go until people drop off. We do have some interesting questions. I'm hoping some of the questions have been answered in the presentations already, particularly the one that Carol just gave about what you can do, because we've had some questions specific to that. Basically, go to the UMKR website and you can find out a lot of information on how to get involved politically through the BDS movement, and especially in your own church and in your community. We have one question that maybe Omar can answer, since it regards tourism to the region. And it says, how do you navigate the need for witness in such a difficult time, and the harms that so-called grief tourism, people participating in that, what do you say to people who feel that accommodating visitors is taking resources from people who are most in need? Instead of bringing people, we need to rally behind people already living and working in the area. And then it continues with, are there training and resources for people who want to go beyond being a spectator to being an activist and witness for justice? So I'm going to turn that over to Omar. Is Omar still with us?
I'm not sure that he is.
Okay. Would any of the rest of you like to answer that?
So basically you're looking for ways to do more
The
activist type
justification
work?
for, the justification for, I think she's talking about just this person is asking about so-called grief tourism, seeing people in misery, basically. versus what I would call, and what a lot of people are organizing, including Omar, protective presence in the region. So if you want to speak to that, Carol, that'd be good.
Sure. Yeah.
I can jump in too after.
Okay. Yeah. One of the things that we heard over and over again while we were there was thanks from the people that were there and that we were visiting. The fact that we are there showing solidarity and they're able to share their stories with others who are genuinely concerned about what's going on and understand the struggles. Really, I think we work very hard not to exploit the despair that they're feeling or the issues that they're facing, but more to be a listening ear, someone that understands, someone that, again, can come back to our respective countries and have more credibility in order to explain to people and educate people that aren't as aware maybe as we are and haven't had the opportunity to go. So I don't really feel like that, we're really exploiting it as a grief tour. It's more of a solidarity atmosphere when we're there, and we've always been thanked profusely for being there when we do go. Sarah, you want to take the rest of it?
Yeah. One of the major things we do is contribute to Palestinian economy.
Yes.
We only use Palestinian airlines. We stayed at the Christmas Hotel in East Jerusalem, which had not had hardly any tourist groups since October 7th, and they're just so grateful. When we went to the Bethlehem large gift shop, they were, we're really struggling because it has been a tourism economy for many of the people that we visited. So on that, I would also say that hearing the stories and being with people, you do share in their grief and you bring their grief back home. But it's a way that every day I am remembering all that I have and people who have almost absolutely nothing. And it channels my own need for being helpful in the world. So that in my local communities, I'm much more aware of the struggles we have and how much even our poorest of the poor have compared to them. And to be able to share that story and the struggles that people have is not taking advantage of them. Again, they're so appreciative every time we showed up.
I'd like to continue that just from a personal note. I took a small group of volunteers to one of the villages in the northern West Bank, and the priest literally broke down in tears when we arrived. He said, "You're the first visitors we've had in 3 years." And also, just to answer, how does she go beyond being a spectator to being an activist witness for justice? You can sign up for what are now being several organizations in the United States, and not just in the United States, but for those in the United States, certain organizations are organizing very fast-track trips for people, particularly who have already been to the region and know what it's like to be there and are willing to put themselves at risk to be what they call a protective presence in the region. These would be people who would stay with the families in villages where the soldiers are coming in the middle of the night and doing house-to-house searches. Having an international in that house, they're less likely to break all your furniture and all your dishes and, use knives on everything because they know we take photos, we write articles, the word gets out about what they're doing. So it's a way to try to protect the families. Same thing with all of harvest time, having internationals in the fields when it's harvest time to be a buffer between settlers who are attacking the farmers when they're trying to harvest their olives. Those are very specific groups that are going, and they're very small, usually 6 to 10 people. But that's one way you can take it to the next step to help protect the Palestinian population in the region. And again, you bring that story back and you tell that story about what you've experienced there. That's the key. We have a more political question. This refers specifically to the U.S. House of Representatives H.R. 9495. And that's a bill that's being presented as a resolution, not a bill, that is being presented to the that would grant the White House unchecked power to shut down any nonprofit organization, including civil liberties organizations, universities, media organizations, religious institutions, such as churches, based on a unilateral accusation of wrongdoing and without due process. It grants the Secretary of the Treasury unfettered discretion to designate the U.S. nonprofit as a, quote, terrorist supporting organization. This is nothing new, believe me. This is not new. And the question is, why is the U.S. accepting this and empowering this? To strip the tax exempt status? Well, we can all pretty much answer that question. And it's only going to get worse with the upcoming administration, sadly. Would anyone particularly like to address that?
Okay,
Anyone?
this is a really dangerous, I think it behooves all of us to get in touch with our representatives and voice our displeasure and encourage them not to vote for this. It's totally against everything that the United States should stand for. It's arbitrary, as I understand it. They can just take it away without due process, like Janet said. And so it's, again, it's just a way to try to control the narrative, and it's dangerous. So I would encourage every one of you to contact your representatives and encourage them not to vote for that. In fact, we can, if you let us know, we can provide you with links, I think, for some of the appeals to sign and send letters to your representatives.
Yeah.
We got word that the resolution failed today.
It failed today? Okay, because I didn't think they did anything
yesterday. It's just the beginning, and so it's still very valid to be researching these areas and what all is coming down the pipe.
And keep in mind, there at the state level, there are a lot of similar laws or bills that are trying to be passed into law at the state level. So you have to be really vigilant at all levels of the government.
Yeah, thank you,
Carol,
Jesse,
did you want to say something about that?
Nothing that wasn't already shared.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I would like to give a shout out. We have several people on this webinar who went on our trip, and we have 2 Catholic sisters, and one Sister Diane is 84 or 86 years old, and yet she went on this trip and she kept up with it. So.
Okay, any other questions, Janet?
Yes. I'm trying to shorten them.
Just a couple more minutes.
Kind of long explanations before they get to the question. Okay, Carol, I think you touched on this. Do you have an intro educational program for folks in the pews and on the altar and on the altars? That's important. To learn about the history and present present grave injustice, perhaps a 4-week seminar for Advent. I'll let Carol answer that because she sort of inferred that earlier.
Yeah, John, did you want to say something?
I put in the chat a link to a video that was made 8 years ago by United Methodist missionaries. It was very prescient about what was going to happen. And it's a great way to start a gathering at a church, because it shows, the question that's on people's minds is, what about Hamas, all this sort of thing. And it basically shows that the oppression was unbearable 8 years ago, and some sort of response like this was almost inevitable. So I would suggest that it's in the chat under my name.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I guess what I would do is I would refer you to the United Methodist for Kairos Response website and go to the resources. We've got a lot of very good information there and resources. There are a lot of things, and we're working all the time on developing even more resources. We're going to be, trying to focus on Christian Zionism and what that means and how to identify that. And we've got a lot of different things. We do have Advent materials on the website. So take a look at that. If there's something that specific that you are really looking for, send us an email, get in touch with us, and we'll certainly get back to you and see what we can do.
There's a quick question on, I just got lost. Basically, they were asking, what is the first step to take when, where do they look for some of these not typical Holy Land pilgrimage type tours? Where can they go to find that information? And if they can't find it, we can all help you with that one. The first step is, if you know of one going, ask, are they in compliance with our resolution on Holy Land tours? That's the first place to start. And if not, then any of us, or you can go to the UMKR our website and say, well, here's how we can be in compliance by including ABC all the way to XYZ. But if anyone else wants to, lots of different tour agencies, not your typical ones, but we can certainly recommend some, and UMKR may already have some on their websites. Carol, you might want to answer that.
Yeah, there are recommended tours on the website. There are other things going. If you're interested in being a part of one of these protective presence solidarity delegations, let us know and we can see, we might have a few questions to ask you beforehand, but we can talk with you about that. Also, Friends of Sabeel North America, FOSNA, I think Jesse he just shared their website as well. So they work on behalf of FOSNA over here in North America. So on behalf of Sabeel, I should say, they partner with Sabeel. So, and they're the ones that have been doing these tours. So, just reach out, get in touch with us. If it's something that you're interested in, we can certainly either give you some information or put you in touch with people who have it.
Lots of questions about links to the videos, and I think those have been posted in the chat, and they will be on the website also, correct, Carol?
Yes.
Yes. Is it not true that there are Palestinians and Israelis who do like each other? I think this came from Omar's comment, who are joining together to work for one land for all inhabitants.
Yes, definitely. When I've been over there on my trips, there've been several times that I've been in meetings with people who are both Israeli Jews and Palestinian Muslims and Christians, and the fact of the matter is there were Jewish people that were living in Palestine prior to the Nakba, and they lived next door to one another and they got along well and they helped each other. And, a lot of people forget about that too, that there was a Jewish presence in historical Palestine. And, that has continued through today. A lot of what the animosity comes from people who've come from outside. And it doesn't have, anything to do with religion. It has to do with governmental powers, military powers, and land grabs and money. There's a lot of money in war. So it has a lot to do with that. Janet, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, keep in mind, it's also very difficult for the two different populations to even get together because this was the purpose of the separation wall from the get-go, was to keep the population separate so that any discussion for peace would be almost impossible. If you can't get out of the West Bank without a permit to go to a meeting in Tel Aviv, how are they supposed to discuss the situation? They can only discuss it with people who are already in Tel Aviv. So that adds to which is another reason why a lot of these events take place outside the country. People have to travel in order to be able to get together because neighbors can't be neighbors anymore. And as Father Shakur always says, we don't need to learn to live together. We need to remember how we used to live together.
Right. Yeah. And not only does the wall and the Palestinians in the West Bank can't get into Israel, but there are signs posted for any Israelis leaving, trying to get into the West Bank, that talk about that it's illegal under Israeli law for them to even go into the West Bank, and it's dangerous to their lives, and these scare tactics. So it's difficult.
It ain't stopped the settlers from going, it seems, though.
Exactly.
They breaking the law.
Here's a theological or maybe it's a churchy question. Are any USA Catholic bishops or cardinals helping you all to go beyond thoughts and prayers with educational and advocacy programs? Any Catholics in the bunch? I would say, generally speaking, working with ecumenical organizations here in the US, no. That's generally speaking. There's an oddball here or there who, and definitely Pax Christi USA, Catholic organizations are very involved in the issue. The Catholic Church in general has been very selective in what they say about the issue, which brings up another question about, let me see if I can find it. I'll give it a second. Does anybody know anyone in particular, or any Catholic bishops or cardinals?
I'd just like to say the people who organized Christians for Ceasefire, which is the group under whose auspices we went on our tour, is largely Catholic. And I just put the Franciscan Action Network Christians for Ceasefire link in the chat. And for those of you who are Roman Catholic, you can look at that. We also have two Catholic sisters here who could share a little bit about that. But I just wanted to make sure that people are connected. If you're Catholic and you'd like to get involved, this is a good place to start.
There was also a question about the churches in the region. Are they standing up in solidarity? Are they speaking out, etc.? The Kairos document is the classic place to start. That was written by the Christian community of the Holy Land. That said, keep in mind that the denominations, what they call the indigenous 13 denominations, they're there at the good graces of the Israeli government now. So they have to walk on glass shards to be able to even stay open in the region. So Israel can shut them down at any time as well. They have grandfathered clauses. They're allowed to do certain things and certainly not other things. So they also have to be careful in what they can say and do. Just sort of an aside, FYI. Here's a question about UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Works Agency USA. Said, are donations to UNRWA USA as effective as donations directly to UNRWA? The donations to UNRWA USA are tax deductible.
I don't know about that one. Somebody else?
I would say if you need the tax deduction to go through the USA, but also directly, but even more importantly is to make your voice heard, because there is much movement to do away with UNRWA, and they are the only agency that is really able to get things in, although we now know no food aid got into Gaza during the month of September. No food aid. And when we were in the Gazan border at the end of August, there were no aid trucks lined up. And we were the only checkpoint that was open into Gaza on that day, and nothing. And the UN has said 500 trucks a day are minimal with supplies for basic sustainability of life, not enough for everybody, but it would be a starting point. So that advocacy is very important.
When I had a meeting in March with Adam Bouloukos at the UN UNRWA office in Jerusalem, he said they had enough aid waiting to enter Gaza to feed 1 million people for a month, and they weren't allowed to get that aid in. That's the problem.
Well, and I know in the north, there's what little aid does get in, and then it's difficult for the humanitarian agencies to get to those supplies in order to distribute them. So even while Israel may be saying, oh, we let 20 trucks in today, well, where are the supplies located, and are you letting people get to the supplies in order to distribute them?
Right.
That's another whole different challenge. So
we are
at this point
past the 2:30 mark already. For folks who would like to stay on and have discussions or ask more questions, feel free. Do we have a time limit for that? Do you think maybe?
I'm going to defer to Bridget on that.
Okay, because she's controlling everything.
Yeah.
But anyway, I would like to, before we get to that, I would like to thank Bridget especially, and all our speakers in particular. I'm sorry you lost Omar. That could be an electricity problem over there or internet. But thank you all very much. It was very enlightening, a lot of good information. And just to reiterate, Carol, lots of this information can be found on the UMKR website to answer questions you may have.
Right. And thank you to our speakers. Thank you for agreeing to do this when I called you and asked you. So we appreciate everybody. If you have any more questions or anything, feel free to send them through to us via our website, kairosresponse.org. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you to all our speakers. Like we mentioned before, this webinar was recorded, and you'll get access to that in the coming days. And we just encourage you to share it with folks. We have done so many webinars over the last few years. We have a huge pool of educational resources. So if this is your first time joining us, I also encourage you to take a look at some of our previous webinars. They answer a lot of questions and have great information. Thanks again for joining us. And we will also email you about our upcoming webinar. We're looking at our next webinar being somewhere around January. And so once all those details are put into place, I will share the information with you. And I hope you will join us in this new year as we continue this important work. Thank you again, everyone.